What's up everyone, it's Dakota and welcome back to another Pioneer video. And today I've been putting this off for a while and I think it's about time that we take another look at it because it still continues to be one of the most popular decks in the format, and I think it's actually positioned very well with the plethora of Rakdos decks going around in the format. So today we're going to be taking a look at Mono Green Devotion, of course, checking out like exactly why I have this theory that it's good against Rakdos and things like that. So before I continue, of course, if you enjoy the content and you want to see more, please consider subscribing to the channel and ringing the notification bell so you know when videos get posted. If you want to as well, you can go to the description of this video and follow me on Twitch with the link down there, and of course the Discord server as well. Go ahead and feel free to join. So, Mono Green Devotion for Pioneer has been around literally since the inception of the format and has been one of the best decks, and maybe not necessarily one of the most played decks, but has been up there. Like, I would say maybe at the lowest at one point, like the third or fourth best deck in the format, and was kind of a reason why we saw like a plethora of aggro decks kind of show up, where we had like the red white heroic decks, even like the Boros like Convoke deck. I would imagine is very good against like this Mono Green Devotion deck, even though you are playing a lot of like the bigger high devotion creatures and stuff like that. They can block a decent amount of creatures. Like, you also aren't like stopping as much damage and stuff, but really from like what I've played of this deck, with Rakdos being one of the most popular decks, I kind of like being on the Mono Green Devotion side of things. So of course, getting into it, the basic idea of this deck, you want as many of these green mana symbols as you can possibly get on the battlefield at one time to kind of set up something that I will point out here in a minute. So you have Elvish Mystic, you have Landomore Elves. They add a green mana and they have a green mana symbol in their cost, which essentially playing like one of these on turn one sets you up to play your 3 drops in Old Growth Troll and Pelukrinos Reborn. Uh, Obviously, the Devotion's really nice, but for Old Growth Troll, being a 4/4 trample, if your opponent kind of stumbles, you can just beat down your opponent with this 4/4 and probably win the game that way. But if it dies, it can return to the battlefield and it comes back as an aura with Enchant Forest, and the Enchanted Forest has tap to add 2 green mana to your mana pool, and then you can pay 1 and sacrifice the land to make a tapped 4/4 with Trample. So essentially, like, you have an Old Growth Troll that can make your land, or make your forest more specifically, tap for 2 green, and then when you don't need either the devotion or like the land anymore, you can turn the land back into a 4/4 that way. So really, just killing an Old Growth Troll kills like a quarter of it, because you still get the devotion when it comes back, and your land now taps for 2 green, which essentially allows you to ramp in a way, and like if you play this Old Growth Troll on turn 2 and your opponent kills it, well, then now you're sitting with like 4 mana and with another land 5 mana to then eventually get up to a card like Cavalier Thorns that has 3 green devotion, gets to look at your top 5 cards, gets a land from among them, and puts it onto the battlefield, and untapped, mind you, and you put the rest in the graveyard. And when it dies, you can exile it to put a target card from your graveyard on top of your library. This is pretty good because obviously with all these green mana symbols and stuff, in conjunction with a card like Nykthos, Shrine to Nyx, which will add an amount of mana of the chosen color equal to your devotion to that color, you can end up casting Storm the Festivals from your graveyard that you milled with your Cavalier Thorns, which allows you to look at the top 5 cards of your library, and you put up to 2 permanent cards with mana value 5 or less from among them onto the battlefield. The rest on the bottom of your library in any order. For like the longest time, way back when, I thought this meant that between the 2 permanents, it was 5 total converted mana cost, but the card, it only cares about if the permanent you put into play has a mana cost of 5 or less. So, for example, you could put like a card and a Kiora in play, and that's 7 mana worth of cards for 6 mana. That's very good. Cards that let you cheat on mana for your things are very good. You can obviously hit more Cavaliers. You can hit like Pelukrinoses and things like that, and just kind of like just make a bunch of green mana symbols to kind of power up your Nykthos and everything to be able to just dump your whole hand. And there being like a few payoffs, like technically Storm the Festival is kind of like a payoff, because like playing a bunch of 5/6s, 4/5s, and 4/4s eventually can win you the game that way. Pelugrinos even getting to flip into a 6/6 and essentially making your like if it dies, you just make 2/3/3s. It's kind of like a worm coil engine, just with reach and lifelink instead of death touch and lifelink. But looking at like Kiora and Karn the Great Creator, Kiora allows you to untap a target permanent with her minus ability, and whenever a creature power 4 or greater enters the battlefield under your control, you get to draw a card. So just kind of giving you like an added benefit, like it ramps you, but then also like draws you cards from playing your Pelucranos, Ogro, Troll, Cavaliers, so on, and some of your other creatures on the sideboard we'll get to in a moment. You have Karn the Great Creator, and your whole sideboard is a Karn Wish board. I have never sideboarded with this deck, which maybe someone who's a little bit more versed in the deck could maybe tell me that it's wrong, and maybe it could be correct to bring in some of these things, just because like a lot of these cards, like aside from like Cityscape Lever and Woodcolor Automaton, you can hit these off of like Storm the Festival, and essentially like look at a bunch of cards and be able to like put these into play rather than having to Karn and then like maybe having to wait a turn to like play any one of these. But you have this whole sideboard with Karn, which you can go get Darksteel Citadel, which gets you like lets you hit a land drop. Usually it lets you hit like your fifth land, so you can cast like a Cavalier or something like that. Or maybe if you have like a dork or two lying around, like with a Mystic or a Llanowar Elf, you can end up casting a Storm of the Festival and things like that. Also, it's like a card that can't get like thought seized or anything, so like you could just minus Karn, go get a land. That's fine. It also kind of like plays nicely with like Woodcolor Automaton, which like when it enters the battlefield, if you cast it, you untap a land you control, and it becomes a tree folk with base power and toughness equal to the Woodcaller Automaton's power and toughness. So essentially, playing this as a 10 mana 8/8, you could like untap your Darksteel Citadel, and you have an indestructible 8/8, which is kind of neat. I've done that before and won games that way. You have like Cityscape Leveler, which can just destroy permanents when it enters. You would see like a Meteor Golem be in the place of this card, but this, like, whenever it enters and attacks, it gets to do it, and you get to unearth it as well. So, uh, you cast it, you blow something up, it attacks, it's going to blow something up. And with Karn, you make the Power Stone tokens useless because Karn stops the activated ability of artifacts. You have Might Stone, Weak Stone, can draw cards, can also just like end up killing a creature with a -5/-5. And like the 2 mana can't be spent to cast non-artifact spells, which your whole sideboard is artifacts. You can cast those spells, or you can just use the mana to activate Nykthos as well. It just kind of like pulls double duty there. You have Sky Sovereign that can go and shoot down creatures or planeswalkers, and with Karn, you don't even have to like necessarily have a creature to crew the Sky Sovereign. You can just plus on the Sky Sovereign itself. Karn will make it a 5/5 instead of a 6/5, but you're still getting the effect of just getting to shoot a creature down and then like attack a planeswalker or just hit your opponent's face, whatever. Chariot, same idea. You could plus Karn, but this will actually get to be a 4/4. It'll create 2 cats when it comes into play, and of course attack, make copies, so on. This just is very good like in the grindy matchups and stuff like that. I like having it there where you just kind of gum up the board, and then eventually you get enough devotion to do your combo, which I will go into now because this will probably be the longest explanation for the video. So you have this card in here from M14, and I remember this card, or M15, excuse me, that is very nostalgic to me because it was one of the first mythics that I actually pulled when I like started playing Magic, and that's the Chain Veil. It's at the beginning of your end step. If you don't activate the loyalty ability of a planeswalker this turn, you lose 2 life. However, you can pay 4 and tap it, and each planeswalker you control may activate one of its loyalty abilities once this turn, as though none of its loyalty abilities have been activated this turn. Now, I didn't know it worked this way, but if you say, play like a new Kiora, like you have, Kiora 1 and Karn 1 in play, and you activate the Chain Veil, all right? So, you activate the Chain Veil, you use Kiora to, untap it and activate it again. So you activate the Chain Veil 7 times, whatever. You play a new Kiora, you can now activate that Kiora up to 7, or, up to 8 times. So like once for like getting to activate it, your once for a turn, and then for each time that you've activated the Chain Veil. So you get into these loops where like with Nykthos, if you are able to generate like an obscene amount of mana, I mean you need like probably like 20-ish mana, I would say, to do it reliably. But like once you activate the Chain Veil enough, you know, uh, you're going to end up making enough mana to do so. At least in my opinion, it will end up being enough. You are able to essentially like play Karn. You're able to like go get something, plus on something, and then minus one last time to put the card in the graveyard. Of course, activate Cure enough to put it in the graveyard to then go get the card Pestilent Cauldron slash Restorative Burst. Cast Restorative Burst, return the Kiora and the card into your hand. Each player's going to gain 4 life. You exile the burst, and then of course you have like your tons of mana, so you're able to play both. And then you're able to like Karn, go and get some of these other cards like a Cityscape Leveler, Woodcaller Automaton, Sky Sovereign. Just kind of like flood the board, make it very hard for your opponent to actually win the game with those things, and pass the turn that way. Or you can get the Stone Brain and essentially just activate it a bunch of times. So in this way, like if you just generate, like we essentially have infinite mana, we do this a bunch of times. Our opponent has a bunch of life. It is very hard to kill your opponent when they have a bunch of life. And while I was able to get around having my opponent gain an obscene ton of life and just like play enough big creatures and shoot down enough of their board and neuter their hand to where there was nothing that they could do, that I could just attack and kind of save time playing on Moto. On in paper, you can play like the Stone Brain, exile it, name a card. If your opponent has cards in hand, whatever, you do the thing. You exile up to 4 cards with that name, and you exile them, and then they draw a card for each card exiled from their hand this way. So you can get the Stone Brain because it exiles itself with Karn the Great Creator, and essentially like Stone Brain your opponent twice, and then get back the Pestilent Cauldron to bring back your Planeswalkers and kind of keep the loop going until you exile every single card in your opponent's deck with the Stone Brain, because it allows you to just name a card, so you can name basic lands and stuff with it. And then you can name the last card in their hand. If they do have a card in their hand, this is kind of like how you win the game, like essentially immediately on your turn. So you exile like every other card in their library. You make sure that they have at least one card in hand that you can name with it, and then you take that card last, and they are forced to draw a card. They have an empty library, so they end up losing the game. Uh, Kind of like the way that it wins the game nowadays. It's a little bit harder to do it on Moto, just because it does take a lot of time, and there are people that do not concede to it. So definitely a little bit harder to play on Moto. But if you're pretty confident with the clicks and going through the combo and stuff, and knowing that like with your last like Karn activation after you've activated Chain Veil enough, that you have to go and get Restorative Burst to kind of like keep looping these Planeswalkers unless you already have them in hand, in which case you can just play them from your hand and go from there. But if you do not have any to actually cast, then you have to go get Cauldron last. So like each iteration, you get to Stone Brain your opponent twice. Um, or any more times, like the more you activate Chain Veil, the more that you can just like plus Karn, plus Karn, plus Karn, so up, get it to a high enough loyalty, and then like okay, activate, go get Stone Brain, do your thing. So there is a few ways you can go about doing it, but really with like 4 or 5 activations of the Chain Veil, you are able to just kind of like loop Stone Brain, Pestilent Cauldron, Karn, and Kiora to just eventually exile your whole opponent's library. Which is neat. And like I said, that was going to be like the longest part of this because that is the power of the deck. Like, yeah, you are playing some of these big creatures that can just beat down your opponent, but you have this infinite combo where you're essentially going to be able to make infinite mana, and with that infinite mana, you're able to play the Chain Veil, and with the Chain Veil, you're able to activate your Planeswalkers as many times as you want, essentially, at a certain point, to where you can then just get the Stone Brain a bunch of times and exile your whole opponent's library. Oh yeah, by the way, the mana base super simple. 2 Boseiju, 2 Lair of the Hydra. You make a ton of mana, Lair of the Hydra can just easily kind of knock out your opponent that way. Of course, you have these 4 Nykthos to generate tons of mana. 13 Force, super basic, especially because you want something to enchant with Old Growth Troll. You have Oath of Nissa. Before, you were using this to cast like Teferi, who sets the sun, and the 5 mana Nicol Dragon God. But now this is just resorted to like letting you dig 3 cards to find like Nykthos or like any of your creatures or your Planeswalkers. This really doesn't miss a lot of the time. This version is playing one Invasion of Ixalan, which is pretty interesting. It lets you look at the top 5 cards. You can reveal a permanent card from among them, put it in your hand, put the rest on the bottom. I mean, it's essentially like a way to just uh, not really search, but it hits like all of your spells minus like Storm the Festival, which is pretty useful. Like it's never going to miss with only 4 Storm the Festival. This card is never going to miss, but you're not all that guaranteed to hit like your Nykthos or Cavalier or stuff like that. So that is Monogreen Devotion for Pioneer. It's a big one. This deck is I would say like in like initially playing it, it's super easy because a lot of times you just like dumpster your opponent. However, it's also super hard because you have to figure out like when to sacrifice your lands that have your old growth trolls, when to sacrifice your Wolf Willow Havens to make wolves and stuff, because that takes away like mana, it takes away devotion. Uh, Recognizing like when you can combo, like always keeping track of like your own devotion and stuff, so you can do the math really quickly. Because playing on Moto, this deck is definitely a drain on your clock and everything, and with people like not very likely to just concede the game when they know that you have like a million activations of like a planeswalker and stuff, just could set you up to lose matches that like you should win. Where like I had a game where I was down to like 11 minutes after game one, and thankfully like my opponent, even though they didn't concede, wasted a bunch of time like winning game two, and I was able to win within time on game three. But went from being like 7 or 8 minutes down on clock to up like 4 or 5 minutes, which is like insane to think about, considering that we played 2 other games after that. So uh, if this deck interests you, go ahead and check out the link in the description down below to where you can, see the deck list, copy it, download it to Moto, etc. And of course, if you're interested in any more content that is on my channel, I have tons of modern videos. I have tons of Pioneer videos. Hopefully, having some more recent like essay videos and stuff coming up soon. They are very hard to record and take a lot of time. And lately, I haven't had the time, unfortunately. But hopefully, here soon, I'm able to get those. So if any of that stuff interests you, please subscribe to the channel and ring the notification bell, as well as checking out my Twitch channel. Go ahead, follow me over on Twitch as well, so you know when I go live. That's going to do it for me. I hope you all enjoyed and hope to see you all in the next video.